welcome to the latest episode of the Show Report, your weekly show through the 2025 season, diving into Maryland football. I'm Ahmed Gafir, back again with John Googs and Ben Strober. And fellas, the show continues on to October. Maryland is coming off a 27-10 win, Big Ten road win over Wisconsin, in what we can say was a dominating performance on the road, fellas.
I'd say I'll be first to say it right now that I was completely wrong about how this team would jump out there. Typically, in years past, the way this football program has been, especially under the current regime here with Mike Locksley, this didn't seem like a game where Maryland would be able to come out and really punch its opponent in the face early on the way Maryland did. And once Billy Edwards Jr. Left the game, really, it was all Maryland from there. It became very evident that its defensive front was going to have its way, stopping O'Neal and everyone else in turn. And how about the performance from the freshman quarterback in Malik Washington? You couldn't really ask for a better way to introduce yourself to Big Ten football, a signature type of win on the road. And I think this gives a lot of confidence going forward to this program and to everyone that's supporting Maryland, because although Wisconsin is certainly down and the situation isn't as good as it was there in years past, winning on the road at that stadium is no joke for sure. It's a signature type of win.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you mentioned, Malik Washington had another stellar day. His fourth consecutive game over 250 yards, wrapping up with 18 of 34 passing, pair of touchdowns. Kicked off the game scoring with a rushing touchdown. Octavian Smith, another standout, had his second consecutive 100-yard receiving game. 6 catches for 113 yards. Shalik Knotts, another multi-touchdown game, 3 catches for 80 yards. Daniel Wingate, his third game in 4 weeks with 10 or more tackles. And like you mentioned, Billy Edwards, that was a key storyline all week and exiting the game in the first minutes there. But for this Maryland defense, a dominant day, and really what we've seen flashes through the first 3 weeks, but wrapped up the Big Ten opener with 10 tackles for loss and 6 sacks, which dives us into our game balls. Ben, what do you got for game balls in the Big Ten opener?
We got to go to my guy, Shalik Knotts. I've been super high on him since the season started. And Maryland as a program has been so high on him for years now. And I think Maryland fans are finally starting to see what Mike Locksley and the others around this program were saying about this kid, the way he'd have the ability to stretch the field vertically. And boy, he came up big. It was so great to see him get the long touchdown to really officially put that game on ice. Not to say that it wasn't probably over already, but just a little bit of icing on the cake. He has stepped up in such a big way for this team that maybe a lot of us wouldn't have even anticipated. The tandem between him and Octavian Smith Jr. as well, those two have really stepped up and really, carved out this new role for themselves. You knew with the departure of Ty Felton and a couple of the key targets that left that somebody was going to have to fill this gaps, especially given that you have a freshman signal caller this year. I think they've made life on Malik Washington that much easier, and just a standout performance, especially from Knotts on the road at Camp Randall Stadium. He's getting a game ball from me.
This week's going to be to the defensive line. This week, the front four combined for 6.5 tackles for loss, as well as 4 sacks. Yes, Billy Edwards going out early definitely helped, but the entire day they were causing havoc. Even when they were only sending 3 guys, they were getting pressure on O'Neal, which was definitely a big factor in the game and not letting them pass the ball much. And then also, Wisconsin could not get a run game going, even with the -7 yards outside of the quarterback rushing. Wisconsin only averaged 3.9 yards per carry the entire game. Obviously, being down 20 and 17 early is going to affect that. But still, that's massive for a defense that's been known for not being able to stop the run for the entire game. So I give my game ball to the defensive line.
Yeah, I think those are two good points right there, and I'll go with the special teams. I think that was quietly really a point of focus for Maryland this offseason, and obviously upgrading the specialists. Bryce McPherson a year ago, Sean O'Hare. I think he's passed his flying colors. He knocked through his pair of field goal attempts in week 4. But I think it's really the other side of it. Wisconsin's opening possession. Zahir Mathis coming up big to register the field goal block, and Messiah DeLome for the second consecutive week registers the blocked punt. this special teams, I think, has really kind of made some strides from week 1, week 4. Mike Loxley noted that he felt that that's where his team has seen the biggest growth from week 1 to week 4. We mentioned kickoffs was kind of a point of concern really early on in the season, and that was really not much of a concern against Wisconsin. I think Andre Powell and Chili Davis are doing a really good job of really upgrading that third phase of the ball, and it really proved to be pivotal in Saturday's win. Now Maryland will look to build on it, coming off the bye week, and their first of 2 bye weeks. And for Washington, they are coming off their first loss of the season. Now coming into CQ Stadium this weekend, 3-1 overall, a 24-6 loss against Ohio State this past weekend. Opened up the season with wins against Colorado State, UC Davis, Washington State. For Maryland, Washington, this will be the first matchup between the two as Big Ten teams, but this will be the first overall matchup between the two teams since the 1982 Aloha Bowl, and none of us were alive for that. So, names to know for this weekend: Damon Williams, a dual threat, probably the biggest dual threat quarterback, the most explosive dual threat quarterback that Maryland has faced to date. Jonah Coleman, big play running back, leads the country in scoring, sits fourth in all-purpose yards, ninth in rushing. So the run defense that Maryland saw in week 2 will need to come up large once again. Denzel Boston, a 6'4" wide receiver. So this offense that's coming into College Park definitely has some firepower. Let's go into the biggest storyline, the biggest matchup, the biggest question for this Saturday. Ben, what is your one thing to watch?
Yeah, real quick before I even give that, I wanted to ask a quick question for some clarification. Do you know, did Washington stay out east after they played Ohio State, or did they go back, and are they flying across the country again? Do you happen to know?
They went to Washington. Jed Fish was talking about it. They are flying out on Thursday. They're practicing locally on Friday, and then we'll play on 3:30, 12:30
Okay,
on Saturday.
well, with that being said, I think that is actually a huge storyline for this game. We've seen the way that plays out in the National Football League, that teams that are flying across the country usually are at a severe disadvantage, and you're given the fact that Maryland is coming off 13 full days of rest since playing their last game. I think that's really going actually to be a big factor in this game. Maryland's going to have a fresh defensive line. Maybe you're going up against a more beat-up offensive line here that you've seen for Washington, and especially now that they're flying across the country. That's going to be one of the biggest storylines. Can the front four continue to wreck the game the way they have? They completely took over on the road in Wisconsin, of course. Now you come back home after one of your biggest wins in quite some time. You have the home crowd behind you. I think a lot more people are going to be at CQ Stadium after the thwomping at Wisconsin. You have a marquee opponent in Washington coming to town here. And just look at the way the numbers have kind of stacked up for Maryland, especially defensively. Third down is something that really is eye-popping. Teams have only converted on 18 of 70 attempts. That's 25% on third down. And that's a testament to how good this defensive front has been. When they have put teams in obvious passing situations, you let your Sahir Mathis, your Sidney Stewart, those guys go to work. That's why you have the most sacks in the nation through 4 games with 16 right now. Those guys are able to impact the game in ways that you wouldn't even have imagined were possible for this Maryland team entering the season, considering how poor they were rushing the passer last year. And everyone is a beneficiary of that. The improved secondary looks so much better because you constantly have QBs that are under duress, having to make high-pressure throws with a guy right in their face. That's allowing everybody to eat. Dante Joyner, Damari Glasker, Jalen Husky, who had the big interception to really set things up for Maryland early on in the game. I think the defensive line is going to show out today. And, given the fact that Washington's coming across the country, that's a huge storyline for me.
Like per usual, every week it's going to be, can the offense get the run game going? You're going to be facing a defense in Washington. They only allow 83.3 yards per game rushing the ball. It doesn't matter who you're playing and how bad they might be. That is insanely impressive. And the only way you're going to be able to take pressure off of Malik against a stout defense like Washington is being able to run the ball. I thought against Wisconsin, we only ran, I think it was for like 65 or 70 yards, but I thought they had some success running the ball off tackle into the outside, and I wanted us to do that more, but we didn't. hopefully we can build off of that success and run the ball more and more successfully to help take the pressure off Malik and help him thrive in the passing game.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think Loxley he kind of touched on it. I think statistically, Maryland might not be showing that they can run the ball efficiently, but I think in spurts, and I think we've seen flashes of it through 4 games where Maryland has kind of been able to to lean on the run to set up the pass, the play actions, and Malik being able to make some plays with his legs at times. So I think that's a good point. I think this weekend it's kind of looking an eye on the secondary, and I think I think Damon Williams, I think obviously keeping him contained, a guy like Daniel Wingate, keeping him on a QB spy to keep Damon inside the pocket. Loxley talked about, Jonah Coleman, really being able to tackle him. And, he's a guy that he probably won't go down on the first contact, especially not every time. But I think the secondary is where you can really turn Washington one dimensional and concentrate on Jonah Coleman. I think Denzel Boston, Dante Joyner, I think that'll be a really fun matchup to watch. I was looking actually right before this podcast, right before we recorded, someone had Denzel Boston going 24th overall in the first round in next year's draft. He's a 6'4" wideout. He leads the team in catches right now, and he's a type of receiver, a type of one-on-one downfield threat that Maryland really hasn't seen. And really anything that's within his catch radius, he really does seem to find a way to come down with it. I think Dante Joyner, he's a guy. Jamari Glasgow, I think, Loxley, he talked about, he expected him back against Wisconsin. He made the trip, ultimately was a scratch. So looks like he should be available for this weekend. But I think Dante Joyner is a guy with his athleticism, his ball skills, and then a guy with Jalen Husky over the top to really keep down, to really limit the big plays. But I think that's really that big matchup for Maryland. And like we said, Jonah Coleman, he's going to get his, but it's all about limiting the big plays. But taking away the production from Boston will definitely go a long way for this defense that's really shown flashes through 4 weeks. And so with that, we will dive into our catalyst of the game, brought to you by Catalyst Hot Dog. The Catalyst brought the Jersey dog to the DMV, featuring premium dry-aged Black Angus all-beef hot dogs made in Maryland, served with handmade toppings, including hot onions, relish, and their signature Texas chili sauce. And don't miss their original garlic knot dogs. Catalyst always offers vegan dogs as well as gluten-free buns, because Catalyst has food for everyone. Find them in CQ Stadium in Section 14 and the Xfinity Center in Section 210. And make sure to tell the people a hot dog is a sandwich. And with that, we will dive into our score predictions and catalyst of the game. So, Ben, what you got?
So I think I got Maryland winning this one, 26-23 at home. I think it comes down to a Sean O'Hare field goal at the end of the game. I think he comes up big and ultimately is able to win this game for Maryland. All I can say is the way it's set up right now, if you were a betting man, +6.5 is the current spread in favor of Washington. So Maryland is +6.5. I would be heavily leaning on taking Maryland's points right there, because it's a Washington team that had to travel to Columbus, Ohio last week, play in the shoe. They go back home, and ultimately they're going to travel across the country once again, and Maryland is coming off a super adequate amount of rest. I feel like this really sets up well for Maryland to show out in a big home game where you hopefully have a super energized crowd there. I think if your defensive line can continue to do what it has done through the first 4 weeks of the season, continue to generate pressure on the quarterback, ultimately, I think they'll be fine. I think that would leave the offense enough wiggle room for Malik to do what he's been able to do. And if, like you mentioned, John said, establishing a ground game will be pretty important as well. Maryland can win the time of possession. I think they can get it done at home.
And forth in this all week about who I think is going to come out on top, because there's that massive elephant in the room of, I think it's 0-9 coming off of a bye week since Loxley took over. But I don't know exactly how good Ohio State is, and B, the quality of opponent Washington has played, you don't really know how good of a team they are as well. That because of that, I'm going to say it's going to be 24-20 with the defense getting the stop on like 4th and 2 when Washington's in the red zone. I think the catalyst of the game is going to be getting the run game going. If you can control possession and keep the ball out of Williams and Coleman's hands, I think that is going to be your biggest factor to having success in the game, so you can try and get the win at home and go 2-0 in Big Ten play.
I am going with 30-24 Maryland. I think, Loxley, he talked about it during his weekly press conference. He was asked a couple of questions about the being winless after a bye week, and I think that's valid. I think it's a valid point in the grand scheme of things. But I think the part that sits with me that doesn't carry any weight with this year's team is the fact that, we've really been talking the all offseason about the upgraded coordinators, 64 new teams, this freshman group. Loxley's said time and time and time again, you don't know what you don't know. And I don't know that that stench really, stays with the freshmen with this group. So I don't know that I'm putting much stock into it. But I do think that, the extra time off, Maryland likely getting Jamari Glasgow back, I think will be a big piece. Like you talked about, obviously, I talked about Maryland's defense really needing to limit the big plays, but Maryland's offense will need to create the big plays. And I think this is kind of that game for Jalil Farouk, who's a guy, maybe a little bit a gadget guy, to really create space and make big plays. I think you saw early on in the Towson game, Maryland made the concentrated effort of getting him the ball and finding him ways to get him the ball quickly. I think that he's a guy that, he be able to replicate that once again. I think, like you talked about earlier, Ben, Shalik Knotts, really being a breakout piece for this offense. And he kind of adds that vertical threat to the offense. Jalil Farouk is a guy that can, your gadget type. And obviously, Octavian Smith is a little bit of a Swiss Army knife in terms of, being able to make plays in the slot on the outside. But I think, and Dorian Fleming, obviously a guy that can make the physical plays to move the first down, move the chains, and obviously has a couple of possessions to open the season. But I think getting a guy like Jalil Farouk involved, getting him active, and really being able to attack this Washington secondary, I think will be the big thing. So getting Jalil Farouk activated, and I guess somewhat of a tangent, but Loxley talked about the concentrated effort on limiting drops through the bye week. So I guess that goes hand in hand, limiting the drops, and we will see what the week-to-week improvement is coming out of the bye week as Maryland looks for, as we mentioned, its first win under Mike Loxley in games out of the bye week. That'll do it for the latest episode of the show report. Kickoff is at 3:30 p.m. on BTN this Saturday. Make sure you stay locked in over on InsideTheBlackAndGold.net for all your Maryland news with Big Ten football officially here, basketball season around the corner, and recruiting picking up speed.